Welcome to the Darkstream. I'm VoxDay, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Happy Friday. A little late here. My apologies to Brittany Pettibone. I was supposed to do her show, record her show tonight, but I got caught up in some other stuff, so I'm going to have to do it next week. So I wasn't planning. Alright, we're going to get rid of this guy. Yeah, stop talking. We've made it clear about talking about volume. If you're going to bring up the volume stuff again, I'm just going to block you. I don't want to get into it. Anyhow, it is one of these days I'll get a better device or something here, but not now. So the only reason I have this, in fact, is for a game that I was developing, and it just happened to be useful for this. I'm going to get a better Android device eventually here, but I'm not yet. I'm waiting for the right for the right one to come along. What I wanted to talk about tonight is something that I've been writing about a lot recently, but it wasn't until recently that I started actually looking into it. You know, one of the ways that I distinguish both my blog and my books from a lot of the other stuff that you see other commenters doing is that I like to look into the history of concepts. I like to look into the etymology of words. I find that when you go and you dig a little bit deeper, you get a much better understanding of what the truth is. And many times you learn that your basic assumptions, the stuff that you were taught before you really reached the age of being capable of critically thinking and actually occasionally thinking for yourself, many times what you've learned is false. At best, it is a simplified and crude version, but quite often it's just entirely false. And so, one of the things that I've been looking into recently was the concept of civic nationalism. And the reason, of course, I've been looking into it is because of the way that it is contrasted with the nationalism of the alt-right. And, obviously I'm not a civic nationalist. To the extent that I was one, I was a unconscious civic nationalist. It was just the stuff that I was taught as a kid, growing up, reading about. No, it's not self-deception. It's actually being brainwashed. It's about historical propaganda. Anyone who went to school in the 70s and certainly later was definitely subject to civic nationalist propaganda. That's why we actually had courses in high school and junior high that were called civics. What they were doing is indoctrinating you into the core concepts that they wanted adult citizens to have. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. Every society has to pass on the rules to its future citizens. Now, the problem with it is that a lot of the stuff that they were teaching us is false. The ideal of the melting pot, we were taught that was part of the American tradition. It's not the American tradition. It's a false narrative that was created by Jews who wanted to ensure that the later immigrants, not just them, but also the Italians and the Irish and so forth, that they wanted to establish that they were just as American as anyone else. And so they came up with this concept of the melting pot. And and it's totally false. In fact, it wasn't even written by an American. It was written by a Russian Jew who lived in Britain. And if you actually read the play, The Melting Pot, I've read The Melting Pot. It's not even about America or Americans, really. It's basically about Russian Jews and their bitterness over their treatment by the Tsar. And so when you read it, you realize that this is not somebody who knows anything about America or the American tradition. It's not a horrible play, It's certainly got some very lofty and elevated language, and I can see why it was effective. But you can also understand why it was written, but that doesn't justify later generations teaching it as if George Washington wrote it or Thomas Jefferson came up with the concept. It's just not true. And so, now we're in a situation where, but here's the interesting thing, and here's something that kind of astonished me the other day. And the funny thing is, this is not, deep, dark conspiracy theory stuff. This is stuff that's on, Wikipedia. All you need to do is dig for 5 seconds, and you'll find it. You scratch the surface, and it's there. So how many of you are familiar with my book, SJWs Always Lie? Not so many? If you recall, who can tell me who is responsible originally for the core concept of social justice? Does anyone remember that? John Stuart Mill, exactly. So what was interesting is that the original, here's another question. What is another name for civic nationalism? What is the primary alternative description of civic nationalism? Can anyone tell me that? No, not imperialism, not globalism, not propaganda. Nope. It's a different adjective. I'll give you a hint. I'll give you another hint. It's a different adjective. Liberal. There you go. Liberal nationalism. Now, isn't it interesting that so many conservatives proudly call themselves civic nationalists? They're openly calling themselves liberals. And furthermore, the guy who came up with the concept of social justice, the one who created the term and created the concept of convergence, the term that I coined, the social justice convergence, is based on a phrase by John Stuart Mill where he says that the purpose of social justice is for all individuals and institutions to converge towards the highest ideals of social justice. Okay? So, but what's interesting is that if you look up civic nationalism on Infogalactic, what you can see is that this civic nationalism, this liberal nationalism, is part and parcel of the same concept of social justice. And so, civic nationalism is an aspect of social justice. Globalism is simply it's the larval form of globalism. Globalism is just the next stage. But they're both the same. They're all from the same root. John Stuart Mill, according to Infogalactic, according to Wikipedia, according to anything you look up, you'll see that he is considered to be one of the fathers of liberal nationalism, of civic nationalism. So the irony, of course, is that civic nationalism is itself dis-civic. No, the globalized world is not inevitable. In fact, a globalized world is impossible. And so what we're seeing is that all the these romantic notions that you see, we heard Trump's a civic nationalist, okay? There's a lot of good people who are civic nationalists because they don't understand that civic nationalism is fundamentally anti-American. It is fundamentally anti-national sovereignty. It is fundamentally dis-civic. It is even, I would argue, although I can't conclusively prove it, it is even dis-civilizational. And so the thing that you have to understand is that, it's all these people on the right are like, oh, social justice warriors, they're so terrible, they're so terrible. And then they go out and they say proudly, I am a civic nationalist. We all bleed red. How do I define civic nationalism? The same way they do in the dictionary. It is a false nationalism. It is a pseudo-nationalism. It is a nationalism that is based on citizenship. And citizenship is nothing but paperwork. So instead of having a nation of people, instead of having a nation of blood and DNA and language and tradition, you have a pseudo-nation of paperwork. I coined a term today. They are the paperwork people. Real nationalism is more than race. Race is it's kind of funny that people talk about form. The older usage of the term race is actually a subset of race. There are more nations than there are races. There are multiple European nations. The Scottish nation is distinct from the Swedish nation, even though we would consider both of them white, we would consider both of them European. I am an American Indian. My tribe is a very different tribe than the Comanche, than the Cree, than the Sioux. Different Indian nations. And so, I don't really pay any attention to the NRX folks. Some of the stuff they're doing is interesting, but it's highly abstract, and I don't tend to find it very relevant. A lot of them are sort of, obsessed with monarchy and that sort of thing. It's kind of like objectivism. I never paid much attention to that either. It was some of the flaws in it were pretty obvious to me. So anyhow, getting back to the tribe. For example, Jews are a tribe. They're not a race. They're a nation. They're not a race. And so, the thing to point out about civic nationalism is that civic nationalism is no more nationalism than social justice is justice, and they come from the same root. And they come from the same root, and they actually come from the same intellectual source. It's the same Enlightenment perversion that produces social justice, and that produces many of the pseudo-democracy, all those sorts of things. I mean, if you think about it, if democracy is actually a modern Western value, why don't we continue to develop it? We have the means. The will of the people can be accurately recorded now. There's absolutely no reason why we need representative democracy. Representative democracy is a limited form of democracy. We can have more democracy easily. Why do we have courts limiting the will of the people? If you're saying that you favor democracy, but you want to preserve the Constitution, but you want to preserve the courts, you want to preserve the parliaments, whatever. In that case, you are actually anti-democracy. You are, all you're choosing, whether you're a monarchist or whether you are a representative Democrat, all you're doing is drawing the line somewhere different. you're not supporting the will of the people. It's true, and it's true the Founding Fathers weren't fans of democracy, but we are told, we are taught, in our civics classes, we are taught that democracy is an ideal. We went to war in Iraq in order to spread democracy. Okay? So, and the thing that you need to learn to stop doing is to stop this knee-jerk reaction to, well, the Founding Fathers didn't like democracy, so therefore it's bad. Really? You know, legitimate democracy, state referendums, more accurately reflect the will of the people than the system where a single judge can completely overturn it. What is the basis for that? Why don't we, if we're just going to have a single individual making decisions, we might as well go back to having a king. And so, you know, the Founding Fathers were very bright men, but they didn't have the basis. You know, they were creating something new. We have had the ability to see the failures and the flaws inherent in the system that they designed for over 200 years now. Presumably, we've learned something from this. You know, now, I'm not saying that democracy is perfect. I'm simply saying that if you examine the difference between the way that people vote in a referendum and the way that the government's, the representative Democrats vote, it is very, very clear that full, true democracy is actually better than the limited form of democracy that we see currently in the representative system. And so, you know, so the flaws of the current system are very apparent. So, but to get back to the point, you know, what I'm trying to get across tonight is that it's very important to understand that when they, all these things, like those statements that, all the statements about, oh, you know, we're all Americans and we all bleed red. I mean, what color blood do Israelis bleed? What color blood do British people bleed? What color blood do kangaroos bleed? They all bleed red too. So, you know, there's absolutely no meaning there. It's just rhetoric. And rhetoric is devoid of meaningful content. And so the whole, I mean, like I've said, there is an excuse for being a civic nationalist if you don't know any better. But once you understand the false nature of the proposition nation concept, the melting pot, all this sort of thing, you have no excuse for remaining a civic nationalist because you know it's not true. Now, you know, it's different in the case of the God Emperor. You know, he's the president. He is not educating people. He is not expected to speak the truth. He has to speak in rhetoric because the majority of the people to whom he is speaking cannot understand dialectic. You know, Donald Trump is a master of speaking to people who are less intelligent than he is. You know, I have absolutely no doubt that he understands the silliness of some of the rhetoric that he uses, but he has to use it because that's how he communicates in emotion. You know, I'm not good at that. You know, it's one of the many reasons I'm not a politician and never will be. It's one of the many reasons that I will never be the leader of any sort of political movement. I have no interest in it, and I have no skill at it. And that's fine. You know, I don't have any problem with that because that's, you know, I'm only interested in the truth. And so, yeah, that's why, no, I'm not going to be going on any college tours. That's, I think that would be totally pointless. No, everybody, there's a place for things. There's a place for intellectuals. There's a place for politicians. You know, I'm an intellectual. I'm a philosopher. and that's, that's what I do. That's what I'm comfortable doing. And people can take my ideas, or they can leave my ideas, and frankly, I'm not really that concerned about it. We'd love to pick up Milo's book. If Milo asks us to publish it, we will. How has my dad influenced my views? Mostly, I mean, I've learned. My daddy didn't set me up. My daddy didn't help me sell 6 million copies of the computer game I designed. He doesn't write my books. He didn't help me get nationally syndicated 3 times. No, that's a. Oh, no, but Trump is much the same way. Trump did get set up, but you have to understand how common it is for someone in his position to completely screw everything up. It is much. I mean, people think it. Having started as the son of a wealthy, successful father, and having grown up around other wealthy, successful families, I can tell you right now what Donald Trump did is not easy, and it is not common. It is much more common for the sons of rich, successful men to go in the other direction. I could give you dozens of examples of people coming from backgrounds with as much or more money than Trump's family had, and none of them have been successful like him. One of the few examples I can think of where someone was even more successful than their father and really built on it was Thomas Watson Jr. He took his father's company, IBM, and he turned it into, a massively successful company. But that's not very common at all. And so, anyhow, so what I'd like you to do, here's your assignment, if you're interested, is go to infogalactic.com and read the entry on civic nationalism. Because I think, I would guess that most of you that I'm talking to tonight consider yourselves to be civic nationalists. After you go and read that, I think you'll understand that you should not be a civic nationalist, you should just be a nationalist. Like I've said many times before, the alt-right is the only current political philosophy that is fully in harmony with science, with history, and with current events. And so, so don't get sucked in to using the concepts and the identities of this false infogalactic.com. That's where you can read it, or you can find it on Wikipedia. What kind of nationalist? There is only one kind of nationalist, and that that is somebody who supports the right of people to their own sovereignty, to their own language, to their own culture, to their own traditions, their right to live amongst themselves without being adulterated, without being invaded, without being immigrated, and so forth. They have the right to self-determination. That is a right that the United States used to go to war in order to defend. All states eventually become ethno-states. A lot of people don't seem to understand that these homogeneous nations do not spring ex nihilo out of the physical geography of the earth. Yes, physical geography makes it easier, but that's not where they come from. No, Edmund Burke was not a civic nationalist. He was definitely an English nationalist. He was, in some ways, he might, somebody put it well on the blog. They said you've got civic nationalists, you've got globalists, you've got civic nationalists, you've got nationalists, and then you've got ultranationalists. And ultranationalists are the ones who go too far. They're the ones who think that, their nation has a right to expand and rule over other nations. That's a fool's game. What happens to a nation that invades and rules over other nations? It always ends up adulterating itself. It's kind of funny if you look at the high Indian castes, the Aryans. They invaded India, they took over India, they ruled India, parts of it anyhow, and they still insist that the reason their skin is dark is because it was burned by the sun, not because they were mixing with inferior nations, which of course they were, and they did, and they do. And so, and the important thing about being nationalist as opposed to ultra-nationalist is that you have the ability to support other nationalists. Somebody mentioned omni-nationalism. That's a term that I use to describe myself. An omni-nationalist is somebody who supports all the nations of the world. I support Japan remaining Japanese. I love Japanese culture. I love the novels of Haruki Murakami. We just published a great book, Six Expressions of Death by Mojo Mori. It's a murder mystery thriller set in the Sengoku period. It's really good. Even Japanese experts have said this really captures the spirit of Japan. Yeah, baby metal. Love baby metal. But that culture is not going to remain Japanese if it gets, there's multiple ways. I don't think that melting pot ideology was meant to necessarily dilute the strength of nations. I think it was meant to find a place, to give immigrants the right to claim that they were just as American as everyone else. Now, of course, that has been taken to extremes. You may have seen on the blog, Muammar Gaddafi stated that he's as American as anyone else. The Iranian leader claimed that no one has the right to the U.S., that the contemporary U.S. belongs to everyone. Nobody, whether they're natives of the land or they're immigrants, it belongs to all of them. Well, anytime you say that a nation is not a nation, there's nothing. It means if everyone is an American, then being an American means nothing. There is no American nation. And so, and that is the consequence of civic nationalism. That is the end road. It doesn't stop until it's not going to stop before then. It gets there. And so, think is what I would encourage you to do. Most of us don't think, me included. We don't ever stop to think about the things that we've been taught, things that have been drilled into our head, things that we learned by rote. And so we have to learn to think, and we have to learn to actually look at history and learn history and recognize the patterns of history. Then that allows us to anticipate the direction that events are going to take. The globalists are not going to win. The globalists have already peaked, and they know it. Now they're basically fighting fighting withdrawal. They're trying to maintain as much of their position as they can because all of the historical trends are now against them. And so, what's up with it? Well, if you have 1 billion people, it doesn't matter how low the average is. It still means you're going to have an awful lot of smart people. And so, I don't think it's possible to say that we know what the globalists want because there are many different globalisms. It's like saying, what do the nationalists want? Well, what the Swedish nationalists want is very, very different than what the American nationalists want. And even if you say, oh, they want power, well, what they want to do with that power varies from one to the next. You know, I have no doubt that what George Soros wants is very different than what Bill Gates wants. So, yeah, and it's true. Globalists do consider their opponents flat earthers. So what? You know, they can't. They're not debating it because they're not going to debate it in public because they know they would lose. You know, they know that they are. They know that their position is not backed by history. It's not backed by current events. It is a matter of faith for them. It's not a religion, but it's still a matter of faith. So, anyhow, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to those of you who are supporting the Burn Unit. You know, we're doing a lot of stuff at Infogalactic, and you know, you guys are all making it possible. It's great stuff. And also check out Crypto Fashion, crypto.fashion. That's where you can get the cool t-shirts that I am not currently wearing. Yeah, the Burn Unit shirt is pretty cool, I have to admit. I like it. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again this weekend. Have a good one.